Hello, this is Max, continuing on with the video tutorial series for Crossroads, specifically the Technomancy section. There's a few things. Well, to get started, we're going to talk about the modular goggles. And by we're going to talk about, I mean me, sorry. Made like this. Now, by default, they have 0 armor, and they don't have durability, but they don't do anything either. Nothing's happening. Nothing. However, if I mouse over them, you'll see lenses, none. There are 4 lenses that you can put in this thing. And these are them. These are definitely the only lenses you can put in. There definitely aren't any more. Cough! Bobo item. Cough! Sorry, I've got a nasty cough. Terrible. So if I can add any of these lenses to it for 2 experience levels and an anvil. Let's start with the ruby. If I add the ruby and wear the goggles now, and I look at anything heat related, it's like using an omnimeter on it, except I just have to look at it. I don't need to hold an item, I just wear these goggles and look at it. And it's got quite a range too. If I look at it and slowly approach, So rubies are for heat. Emerald, if I put this on, will allow it to read, if I just come over here, gear-related things, like so. And it, it gives all sorts of useful information. If I add a diamond, that will give it the ability to read fluid-related things. Right? And if I were to add a piece of pure quartz, that lets it read magic-related things. So if I look over here, for example, where there's magic bouncing around, so now I've basically got an omnimeter that you wear in your head. It can also measure a few things that omnimeters can't. And one of those things were about, well, for example, if you look at any master axis, it will tell you the total energy of all the gears of that axis controls. Which can be useful. But one of the other things it can measure that an omnimeter can't, I'm about to cover. So this is a gateway frame. The recipe makes 3 of them. To get started, you're probably going to want 6 of them. So these can be placed facing a direction. They can face horizontally or down. They can't face up. If you try to place them up, they'll face down. And the facing is the side with the orange dot. Now, if you place 3 of them in this configuration, and might note the facings, the blocks around it aren't necessary, and then you will have built a gateway. Now, I'm putting blocks around it for, these blocks around it are not required, I just think it looks much less weird. If you have some sort of frame, you could do something fancy with stairs. You can even fill in this inner 3x3 area. It'll still work fine, although it probably won't look as nice. So it's just that these 3 blocks exist in this configuration with these correct facings that matters. So the point of the gateway is that every player has their own workspace dimension. And the workspace dimension is basically a void world, if you know what those are. It's an infinite world where it starts out with only a single block, a stone brick block that you start on, and there's no weather, there's no day-night cycle, there's no monster spawns at all of any kind. It's it's a place you can build, it's a place you can make contraptions, use as a base, whatever. And also later on when we get to fields, which is a very advanced technomancy concept, it's a pretty good place to work with fields, although we'll get more into that when we get to fields. So every player gets their own, and the portal will take you to yours. except one little thing I should note, the portal takes you to the workspace dimension of the person who placed this block here. If someone else were to try and go through this portal, they would go to my workspace dimension because I placed this block. So to run this thing, we actually need to provide a rift beam to the top of the port gateway frame. This thing will open instantly, and it is only open while it receives a rift beam. It'll close instantly once I cut the beam as well. So now it's open. So I've actually already done some building on the other side here. So normally this would not be here. By default, only the block that I'm currently standing on would be in this dimension. It's just I've already placed some blocks here in preparation. So it's dark, but that's okay because no mobs spawn, and if you want to use darkness in your build, you can do that, or you can just put down a light source, and that'll brighten things up quite a bit. But there's no mob spawn, so it's completely safe to not do so. So what should be noted is now that if you've just landed here and you've only got the one stone brick block, if you want to get home, you have two options. Either bring the materials for another gateway with you and set one up on this side, and also set up a source of rift for it on this side, or jump off the side and die, and if keep inventories off, you'll lose all your items. So, your choice. I'm not saying one is better than the other. I mean, preferably you would build a portal here, but who am I to make decisions for you? Yeah. So, of course, in Technomancy, many things can fail if you use them incorrectly. So, just like the Copsolium creation chamber could burst if you overfilled it, if you come here the first time without materials to build a portal back, you're kind of trapped here until you decide to jump off, which I wouldn't recommend unless you have to. So, now you might be wondering, what determines... now you might notice I've hooked up a lot of stuff around this portal. Well, I'll get to that in a bit. But you might be wondering, what determines where the portal takes you back? If every single portal that goes to your dimension lands you standing on this block, and the block is at 0, 30, 0, the block is you aren't, you're at 0, 31, 0. Where does the portal back take you? And that's sort of the trick, isn't it? By default, when a freshly built portal will take you to the overworld, the coordinate 0, 0, 0, and in case you aren't aware, that will land you just in the void, or possibly suffocating in bedrock, only to then fall into the void, which is pretty much just as bad as jumping off the side here. So what you need to do is you can dial coordinates into this portal while it's active, and it will take you to those coordinates. Now, it should be noted that you can only dial coordinates of a portal in this dimension. You can't build a portal in the overworld and then try and dial the coordinates to land at, I don't know, 29, 62, 14 in this dimension. Portals going to this dimension will always land you here. Portals going back, you can dial any coordinates you like. So how do you dial the coordinates? Well, for one thing, you can only do it while the portal is on. If the portal turns off, the coordinates reset to 0, 0, 0 for the next time you turn it back on. Got this set up to power this, so if I turn it on, now with wearing these modular goggles with an emerald lens, I'm looking at this top center block, it'll tell me the coordinates it's dialed. This is why one of the reasons I talked about the goggles first. So how do we actually change the coordinates that are dialed? Well, you might notice these master axes and these labels here. That's relevant. You do it with gears. And just to demonstrate, I'm going to use some manually controlled ones. A gear here, here, and here. Each gear controls one of the three coordinates, so one controls the X, one controls the Y, and one controls the Z. This gear could also be here. That also works. You can also put it here or here, but these two gears need to be on the side facing away from the center. Oh, by the way, before I forget to mention this, entities other than the player can go through this portal. If I just throw some in, they've just gone through. So entities other than the player can definitely go through. So the way this works, oh, and I should mention, so the gear on this block Oh, looks like we've run out of fuel for this thing. We've apparently run out of coal. Let me refill this. Right, so I just turn this on. This one you can see is this one here controls the Y coordinate. This one will control the X and this one the Z. Now you're probably wondering, how do I know which one is X and which one is Z? Well, as the book says, the gear that's facing the north or west direction is the X. We'll see, west is that way, so this one is the X, so the other one must be the Z. Alright, so now that we've got our gears attached, how do we actually control it? Well, if I just do this and make this gear spin, notice it's currently dialed to 0, 0, 0. If I spin it, you'll see it's counting up. And if I spin it the other way, it's counting down. So every rotation this gear makes will change the dialed coordinate by the number of radians it's turned. So if it's turned one full rotation, which is 2 pi radians, that'll increase the coordinate by the dialed coordinate by 2 pi. And if it's a full rotation the other direction, that's minus 2 pi. And of course, half rotation is pi, quarter rotation is half pi, and so on. You can do partial rotations to your heart's content, and you probably should. So basically, you need a system, if you want to dial a specific set of coordinates, you're probably going to want some sort of system where you don't have to sit there with a hand crank and sort of stop it spinning when you're where you want it. You're probably going to want some sort of system where maybe you press a button and it'll spin the gear for a certain amount and then stop it, or maybe have something where where it's always kept, you dial it one time and then you keep it active. Maybe you could have something where you have a redstone keyboard and you type in some coordinates and it'll dial up those coordinates. There are multiple ways to do it. You could, oh, and it's run out of fuel again. I didn't put very much in here. This is just for demonstrations. You could do something, for example, where you just for example, you would use a redstone axis to control the speed of the attached gear and then make it spin at a certain speed for a very precisely controlled amount of time that you control the redstone, for example. There are definitely ways to control it. Like and it requires a level of precision to do it properly. That you really need things like Kopshoium gears and redstone master axes and all sorts of other Technomancy only blocks to do properly. But it's not actually that difficult once to do. I can't be bothered to refill those things. I'm just going to kill myself to get out of here. So that's the personal workspace dimension. Well, let me turn this one off, just because. Although and yeah, items can go through this way as well. If you're wondering why, if you're not quite sure why it didn't turn off instantly when I flipped the lever, it was because there was still receiving a rift beam, because remember these stabilizers will still keep emitting for a bit of time after they've stopped receiving magic, just draining their buffers. So yeah, that's the personal workspace dimension and the goggles. Next up comes something that's rather powerful and useful, and well, actually just a handy everyday tool. The staff, or specifically the beam staff. It's a bit expensive, but you're pretty much only going to need one per player. And to go with it, you're going to need a device called a beam cage and a cage charger. This one's pretty cheap, not really, but. So the way this staff, if I hold it, you see it has a little thing in the top left. That is a little indicator. And if I put this in my offhand, it has to be your offhand, you'll see there's another indicator for the beam cage. And if I hold both of them, with the beam cage in my offhand, I see both indicators. Now before I can use this beam staff, I'm going to need to set some keybinds. Crossroads by default currently has 4 keybinds, and they're all unbound by default. So to use the staff, you're going to need to bind them. They're going to be used for a few things, in fact, but they're all part of Technomancy. So I tend to use R, G, B, and V because these are the the item energy control, item potential control, item stability control, and item void control. So R for energy, for the red energy, green, G potential, blue, B stability, V for void. I just find that easy to remember. So now if I hold this staff, and I hold one of those 4 keys I just bound. So let's say I hold R, which I bound to the energy control key, and if I right-click with this staff while holding R, it did a little click, and you'll see that in the top left that one of those little notches has filled up with red, and if I do it again, it's progressing. So I keep right-clicking while holding R, and it's just, yeah, and now the bar is full. And if I hold Shift and R and right-click, it'll decrease it. So I can increase and decrease. And if I do that with the potential control key, fills up that. Stability control and void control. This is basically me setting the staff for how I want to use it. So I just drain it. Now the cage you do not set with those keys. The staff is basically going to allow you to shoot beams created on the fly from your player and affect things in the world with them, which is really can be quite powerful and useful. However, just think about, and the beam's characteristics are going to be determined by how I've set it in the top left, right? So if I do this with 3 notches of red and 4 of green, that the beam is going to have 3 energy and 4 potential. And I can also add stability and some void and so on. And now if you think back to what some of those beams can do, especially when mixed with void, that means you've got a void potential, which is like a death ray, among other things. You've got things like charge, which could just strike things with lightning. Time, which, well, get into that. I mean, you could do rift, spawn a bunch of hostile mobs on people if you want to be mean to players, or spawn passive mobs by mixing it with void and get some food to eat. I mean, void stability will blow stuff up. Void expansion could break blocks, or just expansion could place them, I guess. I mean, there's quite a few useful things here if you were to try and carry this thing around. I mean, even light, if you wanted to build with sea lanterns in your base, and you don't have access to an ocean monument or something, you could just place a glass block and then hit it with some light from a staff, and that'll turn it into a sea lantern. However, magic isn't free. The staff does not just shoot beams for free. You've got to power it with a beam cage. And even still, it's not shooting for free. The beam cage acts like a magic battery for the staff. So to charge it up, I had a thing a moment ago here. You're going to need to use your cage charger. Place it down, place the cage in it, and now if I hit it with a beam on any side except the bottom, because the bottom would just hit the solid bronze instead of the beam cage. Let me just get some. So let me get some salt and put this in this extractor. Oops, wrong item. It's going into here. And now if I look at this thing with my goggles, I can see it's storing magic. It's storing all the magic from the beam that's hitting this thing, and it caps out at 1024 of each of the 4 elements. So 1024 energy, 1024 potential, 1000. Yeah, you get the idea. So I could put some coal in here, charge that up, and of course I could also charge up the void. Let me just charge that up. And ideally you'd have some sort of automated system where you can just place maybe a beam cage in a chest, and it'll charge it up, or just right-click it onto a thing and it'll... there's things you can do. There's certainly ways to automate. So now if we look at this thing, there's the 3 of those 4 bars on the beam cage are filled up. The 4th bar would be void, and it's not full, and there's nothing in it because we didn't put any void in. So now if I try to, let's say I set a beam of 1 energy, and I've got the beam cage in my offhand, and I hold right-click, it's shooting an energy beam and doing the effective energy at the end. Now, The effective energy is hugely noticeable. If I were to hit this, it would be a bit more noticeable because it's eating up. And you can see my cage is slowly draining. Now, like everything else in the magic system, it's on a 5-tick clock, which means if it says energy usage of 1, then it's draining 1 unit of energy from the beam cage every 5 ticks. And of course, I can't shoot a beam with any void in it because I don't have any void in my beam cage. So, energy's not so exciting. Let's do a little bit of charge. That's a bit more interesting. I could just go, instead of having a proper fight, I could just zap the enemy. I could aim properly. I am bad at aiming at this distance, you know, just have some fun. Now, a beam shot from a normal machine, normally a beam like shot from a reflector can only go 16 blocks. The beam staff is unique in that it can go 32 blocks, which of course is double. However, it definitely does not collide with mobs. It only collides with blocks or reaches the end of its distance limit. So, I mean, the beams from machines do not collide with mobs either. But yeah. There is one other thing I should note with the staff, which is if I shoot this at a machine, it won't actually go into the machine. Oops, my staff. It does not. It does not go in. That's an important thing. You can't charge up your systems with a beam staff. It's for using beams on the fly, just out in the field only. And also, you might discover that some elements, well, for example, you know how charge, other than summoning lightning, turns any rock, any stone material block into a redstone block? Well, technically reflectors are rock material. So yeah, since it's not being accepted in, it's instead sapping it and doing the effect on it, which turns it into a redstone block. So that's the beam staff. That's basically it. There are other things that use the beam cage. There are 2 more devices currently. More might be added at a later point, which can draw magic from a beam cage. They are the prototyped watch and the prototyped pistol. However, we'll get to those. We'll get to those eventually. They're a little more advanced than the staff because they require a prototype to operate, and we haven't talked about prototypes yet. And honestly, I would start talking about prototypes, but I really don't think we have time for that this episode. I honestly do not think we have time this episode to cover prototypes, so we'll do that in a separate video. Just throw this away. I do want to mention that there is a feature from Technomancy, the mechanical beam splitter. This is very similar to a redstone beam splitter. Yeah, I think there's some over here, right? Except instead, well, a redstone beam splitter can only split based on with fractions of 15. So 1/15, 2/15, 3/15, 15 out of 15, which is all of it going down. I mean, even if you try to control a redstone beam splitter with a ratiator, it will still only do 15ths. So it rounds. So if you really need super precision, or you need some sort of system that maybe changes the amount, the ratio, the way it splits based on how much magic is flowing through, maybe to make a system where a constant amount of magic comes out the bottom, no matter how, and the rest goes up, no matter how much is coming in, or something like that, then you're going to need a mechanical beam splitter. It looks a lot like a normal redstone beam splitter, except one side has this little bronze coating and this axle. If you attach a gear to it, any gear will do, although I'm going to use Cop Show him. Anyway, my inventory. The speed of this gear will control the ratio it uses. And if I go in here, mechanical beam splitter, the ratio is the speed divided by 15, capped at 1. So if you have a speed of 0, all the magic goes up. If you have a speed of 15 or above, all the magic goes down. If you have a speed of 12.36, then 12.36 over 15 will go, the magic will go down and the rest will go up. And you can do absolutely any ratio you like. Although it should be noted that you need to have the gear spinning a positive direction. If it's spinning a negative direction, then it treats it as having 0 speed. So just thought I'd mention that, and it's just made with some showing an axle and a redstone beam splitter. I feel like we have time for one more thing in this video, the mechanical arm, which, as you can see, is quite a large block. It's not too expensive, though. Oh, and these are showing gears, by the way. So what exactly is the mechanical arm? Well, it does many things, but it's very difficult to control. First of all, I should mention, only the base itself is solid. You can put blocks everywhere else. It's absolutely fine. This thing can phase through solid blocks, no problem. It's fine. Just the base itself is solid. Well, if you look at this machine, or block, you'll see that there's one redstone port here, and 3 gear ports, or axles. All 4 of those total ports are going to be needed to control this machine. It's not simple. And I mean, depending on what exactly you need it to do, it's possible you could make do with 1 or 2 ports, depending on exactly what you need to do. But for full control of this thing, you'll need all 4. So if we go to the mechanical arms section, the axle ports, the axle connections are used for moving the arm. So you can change where is the end point of this. Right now, the end point is in this block here. Right here. And if I tell it to do something, if I tell it to, if I give it the command, it will affect the place the end point is, which is this block here. So you use the axles to move it, changing the end point, and you use the redstone connection to give it commands. And you're going to want to be controlling this thing by ratiator. I just would have put one in. And I'm going to use a keyboard just for demonstration. Let's first start by just showing what the commands are. So there's quite a few of them. There's quite a few diagrams in here as well. Let's see here. Let me skip through to the section on commands. Right. There's let's see, if I recall correctly, there's 8 different commands. There's 8 different commands, and then each command can be given a side. So let me explain what that means. You can the 8 commands are pick up an entity, pick up a block, pick up from an inventory, use, deposit into inventory, drop entity, release entity with momentum, pick up 1 from inventory. And then you give it which command you give it is controlled by redstone signal strength. And this is the equation used to convert which of those commands it gives based on redstone signal strength. So if you look here, each command has an index starting with 0 and going to 7. And the index of the command given is the redstone signal put in, minus 2, all divided by 6. Capped at 7, of course. And you might be wondering about that dividing by 6. Well, and also why it's minus 2 instead of minus 1. Well, you'll find out both of those things soon. If you give it a redstone signal strength of 0, it's nothing. That's just not a command at all. If you give it a redstone signal strength of exactly 1, 1 is a special case. It will reset the position of the arm to the way it is currently right now. It'll reset the arm's position to the way it is when it's placed. So 1 is like a special case, not a normal command. If you just give it a signal strength of 1. So the reason for the divide 6 is that, and that, by the way, that formula is rounded down. The reason for the divide 6 is that means that you have 6 different signals which will all do the same command. So if I give a signal strength of 2, that's the command for pick up an entity. but a signal strength of 3 will also do it, and so will 4, 5, 6, and 7, right? So you might be wondering, why are there multiple numbers for each command? Well, there is a reason for that. Some commands do not care which, well, most commands do not care which of the redstone signal you use to give them the commands. I mean, most commands don't care if you give them if you trigger them with a 5 or a 3, right? If both are in their range. Some, however, do care. There are a couple commands where which of the 6 you use indicates a side. So the smallest number in the range is down, and then up, and then north, and then south, and then west, and then east. So the equation for the direction index, and these are the numbers that go with each direction, is redstone minus 2 all modulo 6. Yeah. I mean, so if I were to give it a signal strength of 3, what will that do? Well, redstone minus 2, all divided by 6, so that would be 1 divided by 6, and then round that down, so that's 0. So the command is index 0. So we know we're giving it a pickup entity command. Now, which side is it being given? If we're passing it 3, then 3 minus 2 is 1, and then 1 modulo 6 is 1. So that means that we're giving, if we look at this table, we're giving it the command with the up direction. So we're saying pickup entity with up. Now, pickup entity ignores the direction you pass it. It doesn't care. So pickup entity up is the same as pickup entity west. Doesn't matter. Pickup from inventory, however, does care. So if I just give it, let's say, a 2, and then I just let's just throw an entity here. Pickup and did I type in? What did I type in? I think I typed in the wrong thing. What did I type in? Typed in 2. It would help if I was throwing the item at the wrong place. Sorry, you know how I said a moment ago that before that this was the endpoint? That was my bad. This is. The endpoint isn't the inside of this little prong thing. It's right at the very tip of it. So if you want to know exactly where it is, there's a tiny white dot there. I don't know if you can see it. And that is the exact endpoint. Alright. So I threw the item way over in this corner. So it was, well, it didn't fall off, but so it wasn't close enough to the endpoint. So the endpoint is right on the seam currently where it starts out. So now if I just throw it near there, and I give it pickup entity, okay, it actually has to be a bit closer, sorry. Maybe I should increase the range on that a bit, just possibly. Then we've picked that item entity. And if I were to now command this arm to move, which I'll show you how to do in a bit with the axles, it would move the entity with it. Now I'm going to give it the command to drop entity. Drop entity is command 5. Well, we want command 5. This command doesn't care about side. So if we try and we're going to reverse this equation. 5 equals the redstone minus 2 over 6. So we want to give it at least a signal of 32. So let me do, that sound behind you is rain, by the way. If I give it a signal of 32, it drops the entity. This can pick up pretty much any entity. That would, by the way, if I do entity command, that includes players. Yes, I am now held in this thing. If I press shift, I can escape, except for the fact that it's still receiving a signal strength of 2, so it's doing that command over and over again. So if I turn this off, now I can get out. Alright, and let me just show another entity, just as demonstration. Sure, a creeper. There we go, it's been picked up. And I can turn this off now because it's still held on. And look, it can't escape. I mean, if I were to be in survival mode, this creeper could probably explode if I got close to it, but it can't leave this spot until the release command is given, or this block is broken, of course. Let me just release it. Or I could just kill the creeper. Alright. So let's show a few other commands. Pick up block, that's command 1. if there was a block in the endpoint, what was that? That was command 1, which, let me just show this again. Put 1 over here, so 1 equals redstone minus 2 over 6. Multiply both times. Of course, basic algebra then says, give it a signal strength of 8. Oh, I put this in the wrong block again. There. It's now broken the block and picked it up as an item, which it is now holding. We could make it drop that item, or we could do something maybe a little more interesting. Let's give it command 3, use. And of course, 3, that's going to be 20. It's placed it. Now, normally when it's given the use command, it'll just right-click with whatever it's holding. So if I were to, what's a good example to show that with? That is a loud rainstorm. What's a good example? Sure, let's, just as an example, how about I use, I want something other than a block as a demonstration, but something where you could tell that it right-clicked with it. How about, let me think. How about a splash potion? So I'm going to tell it to pick up an entity. I'm going to throw a splash potion. So now it's picked it up. Now, if I recall correctly, it was 18 to make it use. Now, it didn't do anything, and there is a reason for that. It's right-clicked, but it hasn't right-clicked against anything. I mean, you can, when it right-clicks, it needs to right-click against something. So it needs something to right-click on. So the use command does actually use the direction. So right now, what did I give it? I gave it the lowest number. It's currently looking down when it used that item. And I guess it wasn't close enough. That, or I've given it the wrong number. That's also possible. You know what? I've actually just given it actually, I think it was close enough to the ground to throw the thing. I've just given it the wrong value. There we go. It was working fine. I just typed in the wrong number. I gave it 18 instead of 20. Sorry. I make mistakes with my own mod. It's fine. Let me just there we go. Oh, I missed. There we go. And then if I do 20 again, except this time I'm not going to do 20. Let's do, just for example, let's do 22, which should be north. No, that should be, let's see, it's a little, what do you say? Yeah, that 22 should be north. So now it'll be looking north when it right-clicks with this. And if you looked at that, that thing flew north because it was looking north when it right-clicked with the item. Now, some items you can use when you're not looking at a block, right, like a splash potion, but many you need to be looking at a block to use. And if that's the case, then this thing can still use them if there is a block for it to right-click on. An example of that is, I can't think of any off the top of my head, but I definitely know they exist. However, it's got a special case with items, with item blocks. That's blocks in item form. Because normally, if I right-click with a block in midair, it doesn't place it anywhere, right? However, I've made blocks blocks in item form a special case. And I missed again. I missed. This thing is on, right? Oh no, it's off. I wasn't missing it. There we go. I've made item blocks a special case in that it can place those in midair even though a player can't. In fact, it always places them at the end point. So if I do 20, turn it on, right, it can place it in midair. Now, one of the things that we'll use the direction given to it for in the use command is that if I were to give it something where, let me just give it a reflector. Let me give it some arcane reflectors. This is a good demonstration. Much better demonstration than stone. I missed. There we go. It's I should increase the range, I think. And I picked it up. There we go. Note to self, increase the range slightly. If I give it the use command, so it's a simple 20, it's currently looking down, right? It's 20 will set the facing to down. And, well, this one's sort of, was it? 20 is, yeah, 20 is down. It is, right? Yeah, 20's down. Oh, reflectors are admittedly a little bit weird. Okay, if I give it if I tell it a different direction though, and I turn this thing on, just okay. Catch it. There we go. Horrible aim. Dang it. Picked it up again. It might be easier just to place it as a block and tell it to pick it up that way. If I set it to 22, it's now placed it facing a different direction. It's placed it facing this way, south, and if you look at the command for 22, that should have been north. It was looking north, right. Yes, that makes sense. It's not always obvious. It was looking north when it placed it, which means that it's placed it as if it were a player looking north, and that's why this thing is facing south. Because if I were to stand here and look north and right-click with this, it places it so it faces south. So it does use the direction when placing blocks. Let me show you interacting with inventories. So if I do Command 2, that is a loud storm. Oh dear. Oh, it's over here actually. I think. I always get this misplaced. It's Command 2, which should be. I'm starting to get worried about that storm. Sorry, unimportant commentary. Command 14. This is right. Command 14 will make it pick up an item from an inventory. And if I just put a stack in here, in fact, I'll put 2 stacks. It has picked up a stack from the inventory. It can carry up to 1 stack. It's picked up another stack. I pick up both of those. Yeah, I got it. And I sort of give it items. It's going to keep picking them up until it's got a full stack. And of course, it can only store 1 item at a time. So this command will also pay attention to direction, because if I were to give it the direction of up, it would try and pull from the top of the inventory, and down will pull from the bottom, and so on. That doesn't matter for a chest, but it matters for things like furnaces. Or, technically, boilers, where you can pull salt only out the bottom, so if you wanted to automate a boiler using water, you could technically do it now, although by this point you probably have a water centrifuge, I would hope. I would really hope. So that's pick up from inventory. Deposit from inventory, I think you can guess what that does. If it's holding an item, it's in an inventory, it can deposit, and of course that uses side as well. Drop entity you've seen. Release entity with momentum is a fun one, though it's a little hard to demonstrate when I haven't shown you motion yet. Basically, this arm can move, right? That's kind of the whole point, the main point of it, with 3 axles. If you use the drop entity command while it's moving, it will just drop the entity straight down. It won't have momentum. If I use the release entity with momentum command, it will release the entity, yes, but the entity will keep its momentum. So this has several ramifications, one of which is that you can use a giant mechanical robot arm as a trebuchet if you wish. So if you want to use it as a trebuchet, to launch things ranging from enemy mobs, enemy players, yourself, whatever, items, then you can do so. And pick up 1 from inventory is the same as pick up from inventory, except it can only hold 1 item in the end at a time. It'll only pick up a single item at a time instead of up to a stack. So those are the different commands it can receive. And then, of course, giving a signal of 0 does nothing. So now that we've got this ARM, which can do so many commands and so many variants, and can be controlled by Redstone, this is actually this device actually pairs well with the Redstone registries. Usually, when I automate it, I use 4 of them. I'm not usually 1 to control the Redstone, and then 3, 1 for each axle. But well, let me show you the axles. Now, the simplest way this machine could have worked was that one axle controls each coordinate, so that this one would be Y, one of these would be X, and the other would be Z, and that would just move along. No, that's way too simple for Crossroads Technomancy, where everything is designed to be complicated. This controls individual angles. Well, let's see here. This bottom axle will control the angle of that this whole thing is going. So as that turns, this whole thing will turn. Imagine I'm this thing here, this big thing going up. I'd go around and around, and that this arm would spin around. All right. One of these two, I can't remember which. Hold on, let me check the book. That'd probably be simpler than trying to remember. All right, so the one of the axle port that faces east, so this one here, controls this angle here. I'm sort of tracing it out with my cursor. Hold on, let me build out some extensions. Think of it this way, right? The arm is, and this is sort of a big extension and of the sort of angle this section here is making. This piece of metal here. This axle port here controls this angle between here. So I sort of just do that thing where that angle. And that leaves this axle port, which will control this angle here. Now, if you're thinking this might be rather complicated to use in any meaningful way, you'd be right. However, I mean, you might be thinking it'd be quite hard to work out what angle each thing needs to be in order to get a certain position, and you'd be right, except for the fact that the book contains some equations that I painstakingly worked out so that you can know exactly what angle to set each thing to for a specific position. So here's me changing the bottom one. Great. And now I'm going to do, let me just make sure these are separated out just with blocks so the gears don't connect. Of course, we could use axle to control them. Let me just make this a master axis, make it more compact. Although, let me just show this can be an iron gear, of course. I mean, it's the angle that matters here. Right. And here we go, it's opening, and then it's reached the maximum angle. So now if I spin it the other way, and now it's reached the minimum angle. Open, close, and so on. And here we go, and this is the last one. It's already at the maximum angle. There we go. Close, open until it reaches the maximum and minimum angles. There. It's got quite a long range. I mean, this thing can reach quite far if you were to fully extend everything out. And can, of course, be very capable if you can control it. The equations I've listed several times just because they're very important and complicated. Here's a diagram that shows what each gear controls. So angle. I mean, these in this diagram might be illegible, so I also describe everything in text, just because the diagram is sometimes a little bit illegible based on screen resolution and GUI size. Usually, if I were to where is it? Turn up GUI scale, it's a bit easier to read. Although I don't like playing at this size. So these are the relevant formulas. And yes, I know, they are complicated. it's a complicated set of formulas they're going to use, but they're completely algebra. You don't need any calculus or anything. It's just algebra and a bit of trigonometry, and they're all worked out for you already. You don't have to actually solve anything. You just have to plug the values you want in and solve for the final ends. So, and they're also written in text in case the image is unreadable. So there's some values. So length base and length top are constants. They're mentioned in the book. Those refer to length base is this, length top is this, and then length cross is not a constant. It's the distance from the end point to there. So it's like if you want to convert the XYZ coordinates to the angles you need, then length cross equals that. And then you use length cross in the later equations, which involve inverse sine, inverse tangent, sine, cosine, to get your three angles. Or there's also another set of formulas, go back to them, where if you start with the angles, you can solve for the x, y, and z coordinates. And these are them, although also in text in case those are legible. Although these aren't really as useful, more useful is the going from x, y, z coordinates to angles. If you look at these equations, you can tell that these were quite a pain to work out, which is why I made it so you don't have to. There we go. I mean, of course, if you only need this arm to do one specific thing in one specific block space, you could make it so that it's positioned so that it has the endpoint in the same position and just does different commands, for the redstone control, for example. But how you use it and how many of these axial connections you use is completely up to you. Also, just because this is like one thing I should mention, you notice those equations are very complicated, containing sine and arcsine and so on. Every operator you need is actually available in to do those formulas is available in master axis form. So inverse trigonometric axes, square roots, and so on. So you could actually make an in-game Crossroads contraption that does the calculations for you and just give it the XYZ coordinates you want. There's a lot of things you can do here. There's many ways to go about it. Some are more complicated than others, and some are more interesting than others. So that's the mechanical arm, which is quite the device. And all that leaves is the prototype system, the field system, the prototyped pistol, and the prototyped watch. And then once we've covered those, then we'll be done with Technomancy, and we'll have covered all of Crossroads except for most of the Bobo items, which are you're meant to discover on your own. This one's my favorite. I think this is my favorite Bobo item, by the way. I think this is my favorite. It's so ridiculous. Very ridiculous. Very useful though, but very ridiculous. And it's a Technomancy only Bobo item as well. So, yeah. Yeah, so we'll probably next video will be prototypes, and probably the prototype pistol, and then probably the following video, which will probably be the last one, will be fields and the prototyped watch. So, goodbye.